Kia ora koutou. Hello and a very, very warm welcome to the first ever eHive user group meeting. My name is Dave Sanderson. I'm the product owner for the eHive product. I'm joined here today by my colleagues from the Vernon Systems, Paul Rowe, our CEO, and Penny Collins, our lead technical communicator. On behalf of us and the whole of the Vernon Systems team, it's really, really great to have you joining us, and a very warm welcome to you all. We have a really, really great schedule for you today, a number of different talks that we're going to go through. Paul is going to go up first, who is going to give us an overview of eHive and then some of the upcoming changes and product releases that we've got for the platform. Following that, we'll hand over to Susie, who is down in Southland here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about a wonderful community archiving project that she's running down there. From there, we'll hand over to Gillian Hiscock from Australia, the Royal Historical Society Victoria, who's currently our largest eHive user. And if any of you want to challenge that crown at any point in the future, the gauntlet is set down to all of you. And then we're going to finish up with a session which involves all of you, where we want to kind of get your feedback and some of your ideas and thoughts about what eHive might look like in the future. So I encourage all of you to bring your listening self and your audience participation self. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the eHive product and some of the upcoming changes.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this inaugural eHive user group meeting. First, I'm going to go through some of the product changes that we've made over the last year, and then the upcoming changes I'm going to cover just before we jump into the breakout rooms. So one of the recent things we've worked on is our integration with WordPress. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, eHive can be plugged into a WordPress website. So WordPress is the most popular product for building custom branded websites, and you can showcase just your own collection from eHive within a WordPress website. So we've made a number of minor changes within those plugins. Firstly, it's now possible to set a default sort order for those. So when you're doing a search on the collection within the website, you can have them in a default sort order. And then also we've made a number of changes to remain compatible as versions of WordPress have been released. I'll just swap to show you an example of that in practice. So this is Benalla Art Gallery in Australia, and this is their main website, which they're responsible for building and maintaining completely independently of us. So that's just a WordPress website where they're responsible for that content, and they've designed the look of that website, and then they've plugged in their collection from eHive as part of that. So this is the page where their online collection appears, and the plugins let you do basic search results. You can change the layout and the styling to some degree of those, and then you can drill into individual collection items. So all of that content is just coming live from your eHive account for just the records that you've chosen to make publicly accessible. The next thing that we've made some changes around is flagging rights that apply to records that you've managed in eHive. So we've added a new rights category of no rights reserved. So that quite frequently comes up for things like social history collections, where you own the copyright of the photography that's been taken over those collection objects, but you actually want to share the images so people can freely reuse those. So if you own the copyright of those images, you can now, if you wish, flag them as no rights reserved. And that's a category that people can search for when they're exploring the images that are publicly available on eHive. We've also done some rewording of how that's presented at the bottom of the public page. So there's this new section on can I use this object, with some clearer wording about what those different rights types mean. When you're logged into the system, the main object detail page is where we provide tools to do different things with that record in the system. Over time, we've added more and more menu options there. So we've recently reorganized that to make that clearer. So now there's several subheadings that organize the different options that are available on the right. And that includes the most recently added feature of having the option of changing the catalog type. So within eHive, there's 7 broad catalog types, from photography to art. You might create a catalog record and then realize that there's a different category that would actually better make sense for that particular collection record. Now within the system, you can easily switch to a different catalog type at a later date for that record. We've also been extending the things that you can describe about your organization on the accounts profile page. So that's the page that the general public can see on the main ehive.com site. So we've added a couple of different things on there. There's now an extended section of collection strengths, where you can mark the broad types of items that your particular organization collects. And then we've added a whole lot of extra facilities checkboxes, where you could mark, for instance, if your organization had electric vehicle charging or you had free Wi-Fi. All of those common categories are now possible to tick on your public profile. Lastly, we've also added regions so that within the US, Australia and New Zealand, you can mark what region your organization is within, and that's used as part of the collection search section of the public site. So a member of the public could search for all of the organizations that are within Victoria, and if you'd marked that as your region, then your organization would come up in those search results. We've also added in support for recording cultural permissions that apply to objects. So as distinct from rights, where you're talking about legal copyrights, cultural permissions are sensitivities that might apply to particular objects in your collection based on the culture that they've come from. It may be an object that has some traditional meaning or some special sensitivities around that, and you can now clearly mark that on each collection record within the eHive. So that's one of the options that's on the right-hand side of the object detail page. And so there's 4 broad categories, plus a default of not assessed for any ones where you haven't marked one. And then if you mark one of those categories, you can optionally record further notes describing how people might potentially access this material and what limitations might apply to the reuse of it. We've also revamped the help website for eHive. So all of the field level help now has a much clearer structure and more detailed examples for things like searching at field level. Again, I'll swap to the live site and I'll just show you a brief example. So you can access the help about the product at any time on help.ehive.com. There's a simple home page that tells you the broad categories of help that are available, or you could search for a particular topic. I'm going to go straight to the field level help. And that just gives us an alphabetical listing of all of the fields that you can use when you're cataloging. If I wanted to look at accession date, for instance, we can see how that page is structured. There's always now an overview at the top telling you what type of field it is, whether there's a limit on how many characters can be entered there, and where you would find it. There's also a note to say whether that's a field that the public would have access to see if you'd shared that catalogue record on the public site. And then at the bottom of the page, there's now always a section which says, how can you search on just that one specific field from the simple search box? However, on top of the simple search, we've now developed a full advanced search feature, and that's available both within the private part of the website when you're cataloging and managing your collection, and it's available on the public site. So here we have an example advanced search. So that's accessed just through the search menu on the main menu at the top of the page. And you can pick a particular field you're wanting to search on. If it's a term list field, you can select which terms you're looking for. So those standard terms that you've created are helping standardize the searches so that you're finding the right records when you're looking for things. And then optionally, you can combine those searches so that you search on multiple fields at the same time. So in this simple example, I've looked for a particular term, mineral specimen, in the object type field, and then I've said also look across all of the fields for any mention of the word crystal. Lastly, at the bottom of the page on advanced search, there's some built-in standard filters that are the same for all different eHive users. So filtering on things like the catalog type, whether there's images available for that record, or whether it's public or private. So that's greatly extended your options for finding the records you're looking for, either to then review them further or produce a report. We've also continued working with our partners. So there's 3 main partners that we work with: Trove in Australia, and Digital NZ and NZ Museums within New Zealand. NZ Museums is just going through a redevelopment and a rebrand, and will soon be Koutua. Again, I'll show you a quick example from each of those partner sites to show you how that works within the system. Trove is produced by the National Library of Australia, and it aggregates or copies collection records from hundreds of partner organisations across the whole country. And so that means as a member of the public, you don't necessarily need to know who's the organisation that holds a collection record that you're interested in. You can just go to Trove and you could do a search and it's going to find the relevant material for you. So I've searched for a particular ship that I'm interested in, and it's found mentions of that ship in things like newspapers. So those will have been contributed by different libraries, for instance. It's also found related images. So it's found this particular photograph. And it tells us where that's available. So that's available at the Maritime Museum of Tasmania. And if I click on that record, at that point, it'll go to wherever it's copied that information. And in this case, it's from eHive. So that's a service where each organisation signs a partnership agreement with the National Library. And then from that point, they automatically copy your records from eHive periodically, typically every week or every month. And then all of that information is searchable on their website as well as within eHive. And so the same concept is true for the 2 New Zealand partners. So here I've done a search for a New Zealand town, Mataura, and it's found records that mention that from places all around the country. I could click on one of those and it'll show me the image and the collection record. And then the same as Trove, there's a link to where that original came from. And again, that's a record that's been copied from our eHive public database. Then lastly, the NZ Museums project goes a step further, as well as allowing us to search for collection items across all of those different organisations. It also provides a directory of all of the museums around the country, and that's using the account profile page on eHive. So if I clicked on the Find Museum page and said that I'm interested in all of the museums in Auckland, these are all profiles that have come directly from the eHive site. So I could click in one of those records, and that profile information is coming directly from eHive. So as I said, this website's going through a revamp where it's going to be pulling in even more records than before and getting a rebrand, and that's planned to be launched in the next month or 2. So at that point, I'll pause and we'll switch over to Susie for our first of our client talks.
Kia ora from the deepest south of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Bit of an interesting history behind the latest project I'm doing. About a year ago, I had quite a few people in the community where I actually live but wasn't working come to me and ask me to work in history in the area. They didn't really know what they wanted, but they had a desire to see their history saved and shared. It was a bit of a tricky one in that there was no building, there was no money, there was no equipment, there were no programs, there was nobody but myself to do any work at this point. No real direction, just an idea and some great stakeholders, potentially, and some really fabulous supporters. So this is what I came up with. So, yeah, tasked with facilitating our district's community heritage, these are all the things I had to consider. The settler family's descendants were moving away and taking their history with them, so it was pretty much lost. Small museums in the area were struggling to stay open for varying reasons and losing collections. There was too little time, expertise, nothing available. There was public apathy, and I even found some quite deep-seated loathing to donate material to institutions because they didn't want them gatekept or to be charged to see their own history when they went back to have a look. The digital world was growing. Worldwide pandemics like COVID were changing delivery systems. I have a background in digitisation, and I've been a long champion of Open Glam. So could I use this to an advantage? So looking at all these background stories, I suggested an online community archive. And looking at all the options, there was a few that we could run for free. Some of them are quite technical. There was one I would love to have bought, but we had no money. So we decided we would trial eHive, which I had used before. And it was the 200 free entry items that really took our fancy. And we could give this a trial and see how the community responded and how it went, and if we could get funding and where we went from here. So I presented that to the potential stakeholders, and I suppose luckily for me, they were blown away by the idea and the background work I'd done on it, and said, yeah, let's give it a shot. So we did, and it took off. So people in the community, other potential stakeholders, community groups, organisations, just all came on board. And one of the most exciting things we had happen is a kind of co-governance with people in the community we've had, and that they're saying to us, okay, we will give you our records. Can you digitise them, keep them, share them back with us and have them available to the community? We hadn't anticipated something like that happening, which in a few weeks kind of quadrupled my workload. So then it was, right, where are the volunteers we need? So that was the next thing to go out and find. I'm happy to say as of today, we've actually got 4 volunteers, and we've only been going 8 months since we started our trial. So at the moment, we're just all working from home, and we share a basic eHive account, which is not great, but only one other person has access to the logins, and they work on another eHive site at another museum, so I trust them implicitly, but it's not something I'd recommend. We're going for funding tomorrow to upgrade to a higher entry level, which would give us 3 access points for our eHive, because we're just growing and running out of room. So, but it was a little bit different. I'd used eHive before for a museum, and it just wasn't quite going to work for us as it was set up to run a fully digital platform, which is what we were doing. So it was getting a bit creative was the way to go. So we wanted to capture the history being held in our communities. So we didn't want to take anything in, we wanted to go out. And how could we involve these people? And the start was we had a group of people who came forward and said, do ours first, so we could show everyone how it worked. And I had believed that it would set the groundwork for others to come on board as well, and it actually did. As soon as people could see others sharing their records of history and photographs, they wanted to be involved too. So it just grew and grew. And while we stipulated we want to capture records at the highest possible resolution, i.e. people bring them to us or we go out to them, we've got a portable scanner. If they want to send us photos or records by email or via their phone, we're not going to say no, especially after what happened up in the North Island. It's like earthquake, flood, fire versus a bit of a crappy copy. We'll take the crappy copy. At least someone's got one. So that's how we're moving forward. And it's amazing how many people will start like that, and then they start seeing their things appearing online and then go, oh, could you get a better photo of that if you came out and scanned them at my place? Yes, we could. So it's just a matter of building it up and taking people along with you. And initially, our KPIs we had for a 6-month trial, we exceeded all of them. And we had to upgrade our free trial version of eHive 3 weeks after we started. So that was, things we couldn't have conceived before we did this, but it was just great. And signing up to Digital New Zealand was just massive. Seriously, I mean, I've had people contacting me from Germany and France, and one of the big things we have going here is the Huntbridge track, and people have walked it and never seen history about it, and it's becoming a great walk at the end of this year. So we're doing a lot of mahi on getting all the history of that, and Doc's come on board and partnered with us to get this happening. So I mean, it's massive and it's huge, and the amount of community involvement is massive, and huge supporter of working with your community, co-governing with them, having them involved, making it theirs is really big. And because we were working digitally, we wanted our districts easily identifiable, so they all have numbers. So as myself and the volunteers go on, we now know, like 012 is Tuatapere, that's its number. And we're starting to sort of remember and see and realise this. And then we have other categories. So everything's categorised. And our numbers mean something. So it's not the date it came in, it's not anything like that. It's what it actually means to us. And I found early on that eHive organises entries in alphabetical order, which was fabulous. But I also found it can't yet handle Te Hutu or macrons in Te Reo Māori. And that was funny, actually, because one day I thought I had lost about 50 records because they all started with O, which is an O with a Te Hutu on top of it. And I couldn't find them anywhere. They weren't in the list, they weren't in the pages, they weren't alphabetical. And I was really starting to freak out and about to contact eHive when I went to the very last page, and it seemed to have classified them after Z, and all the place names starting with Te Hutu are at the back, alphabeticalised by everything other than the starting letter with the Te Hutu. So they were there, I found them, phew, but it was just a bit funny. And I had just mentioned this last week because I only just found out about it. Because it might be something that in the future can be sorted out, but for now I found my missing records. And so the A to Z of everything being together for frame prints or photographs wasn't helpful for us. We don't have collections here, so that was why we made it work for us to have entries that are alphabetically listed. So now we have things like Wallace County infrastructure, which is quite a vast field. And then if we follow that by bridges and which bridge, it will actually categorise in alphabetical order for the public to use as well as us. So there's no need to continually search back every time you want something, which some of our users have found extremely helpful. And for me, it was making it work not just for us, but for our users. So that just works really well for us. And this is how it sort of looks and works for us. So last week we had the anniversary of our first bridge opening in this township, and so we listed everything. And so instead of it being randomly numbered across a collection and being all over the place with an eHive, when you look at our eHive account, they actually all stack one above the other. So it's just so fabulous for people to find, and a few people have actually noted, they say our eHive account's easier to use than some other people. So it's just how we've set it up because we could. The other thing we've done a bit differently is because we only have digital records, we don't have to have one entry per photo or object or item. So we can actually ostensibly fit a lot more into our entries, but it is using up our space quickly. So we collate all the relevant history records and photographs within each entry and add them, no matter who or what or why or where. And this leads to collections of different items being present within the single entry. And they often cover a vast amount of information, namely on a family or a business. but we list at the beginning of the entry fields what items are there and where they came from, so people can see this. Other times, if we have something special like a wedding, we won't put it in with the family information. We will put it separately, but not necessarily. But we will also have more than one photo of the wedding under the wedding entry, if that makes sense. So it's just making it work for us. This is how we are here. We've got Rob's and family and Tom and May's wedding, and there's 3 different photos from their wedding. So as a museum would typically enter every photograph separately, we combine them and have the story about the wedding, because it's just digital. So we're also doing things like war memorial pages for those who served, and this collates material obtained on each person. And sometimes we've found numerous descendants and family will contribute to this. So we might have an entry where there's records have come, or photographs have come from like up to 8 different family members, which is absolutely fabulous, but they all sit together within that family's entry for that soldier, and it's really, really great. And family members have even found each other through this, which they weren't aware of each other's existence, but they all knew me or us, and it's quite funny how that's actually happened and helped facilitate families finding each other. And same with businesses. We've got Steve Kokay, who was an early Hungarian immigrant, and we've got a whole entry on his life and then one on his business with a lot of different photos, schools and things as well. So they're all combined together and the history is all in one. So I'm going to run through a quick succession of slides showing some images from our account and how it's set up maybe a wee bit differently. And if you haven't viewed it before, the link is there. And after this is about 5 minutes for Q&A, I believe. And I'm a great believer in community collaboration and Landsec to helping each other out. And something I say often in funding applications too, together we're stronger and more resilient for our shared futures. So it's just something that I always try and work with. So here's one of our soldier files. And a lot of these are all contributed by different people here, but it's all about the same soldier. So it's just to give you a bit of an idea how we're doing things digitally. And here's the list of where all the things have come from. Some are even from myself. I've gone and photographed memorials and added this in as well. So it's quite a different situation, but it just means people can find all the information under one place. And this is the Steve Kokay, the Hungarian settler in early Tuatapere. And so this is his business, and there's 18 photos in total, and they all come up together. So it's just a huge overview of his business. And here's some of the story about it. The other thing we promote is community comments and contributions. And at the bottom of this page, you'll see shared community stories. That's just one, there's more. But when people comment and share a story, it can be on any platform. We get emails, we get texts, we get social media, we get comments on through eHive, and we add them in. If they agree to have their name put in there, we add their name. If they don't agree to have their name, it's just a person remembers. But that's been really huge for us, is having that contribution from the public. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions or any interest in what we're doing, please do get in touch. And personally, and for our archive, for everyone involved, I can say we could totally recommend eHive. It was just a fabulous product, and yeah, they've been really great. They've worked with us on some little issues we were having, and I couldn't have asked for better support. So that's a little plug for you guys, but really, really happy with how it's all working out.
I appreciate that, Susie. Thank you so much for that talk. That's fantastic. And it's been exciting while we've been in touch over the past few months, kind of watching quite how quickly your work's been snowballing and the community engagement in between. So it's wonderful to get a glimpse of that. And I promise you, after you raised the little thing about the Tohoto earlier on in the week, we're working on that one. We'll get that one sorted for you very soon, don't worry.
Fabulous.
Any of the audience who do want to raise a question, feel free to pop that in the chat. Your work on this project really seems to be galvanizing the community together, like so much. But if you had to start again somewhere new tomorrow, not that I'm advocating you move house again anytime soon, but if you had to start somewhere new again tomorrow, like what would you take from this to make a similar project successful elsewhere?
Something for myself personally, because last time I was using eHive, it was a setup set up standards already. So for me, this is like setting up a new system with an eHive. That will be really helpful, and just different ways of doing things. Groundwork on digital collection basis. It's a different thing to what I've been working in before. So with physical collections, and now it's all digital. Experience with community collaboration. Yeah, really how to bring people on board. And like I keep saying, you know, co-governance with your community. Just make people believe it's theirs. That's so important. You know, if they can view it as their history, they will be involved. And we've just seen that happening with, you know, even we had our open days recently at the local club, the Town and Country Club, and the guys were coming up and like telling us all about the machines and the photographs. And just, we can't normally get guys interested in much history when they're younger, but there's a young, you know, like younger guys, truck drivers and bulky drivers and stuff, and they wanted to tell us about all these vehicles. And it was just, and then now they want to share photos, and it's just really, really fabulous. You know, I joke and say, you know, add a bit of history in with beer and good food, you know, look what you get. So it's just finding ways of connecting with your community. And the various resources and different funding opportunities out there. For us, our community board's just been amazingly brilliant. And they're the first one I've ever met who has, you know, in their write-up, it says they're a community that celebrates and protects its history and heritage. You know, and then they give funding for things that match these statements. It's like, well, you know, what could be better? So I like to keep reminding them that when I make a funding application, you know, this meets your criteria, please give us funding. And so far they have. So
that's one of those things which is, I think, quite common to most organisations that apply for funding, isn't it? If you can tag onto the people with their money onto their strap line, you're well on your way at that point, I think. I was also curious, like we met prior to working together with eHive in a previous kind of glam sector life. And you've been doing this a while in different organisations. Like, what would you say your success, or how do you kind of make working with history successful in these different roles that you've had?
I suppose for me, it's all about passion. I was the kid that if ever I was lost, I was at the library or the museum. So, you know, people knew where to find me. So yeah, the passion and the knowledge comes later with different areas, because like everywhere I've lived, and my husband's moved around a lot for work, I've gotten involved in the local historical societies or museums wherever I've lived because I love history. And you don't necessarily need to know about the area, because when you go somewhere new, you don't. But you can get involved and you can learn. And it's that, you know, if the passion is there and the support's there, the knowledge comes later about the area you're working with. And I suppose I've been really fortunate in being involved in history from one end of the country to the other. And it's given me quite a sense of Aotearoa, and it's really, really lovely. And just the community and support. I can be a bit of a nerd, so not everyone gets me, but you know, I'm really, really committed and dedicated, and I think that people can see that. So yeah.
I think in your honour, next time we do one of these, I'll have a "We Love Our Nerds" t-shirt on it. So, I think really what you're saying there is that the passion is what drives it, right? I suspect a lot of people on the call that will be the case. Thank you, Susie. I just want to offer one last opportunity if there's any other questions anybody wanted to ask Susie.
Oh, quickly, Chip. And I was curious, Susie, as to whether the archive team had a physical space where the community is able to meet and share their collection items and their stories.
Well, that is, I believe, about to happen. We applied for a local building that the council was giving away for $1, and we have to be responsible for the upkeep of it. So yes, we've just been told we have first dibs if we can come up with a budget and the funding to run it. So that is going to be my next job. Is adding entries is going to have to take a wee back seat. And thankfully I've got someone else who's familiar with eHive who can pick up that, and I have to get head first into budgeting and funding applications, because we really want to make this work. We know that's the next step, because our open days, we had so many people come along with items, And it was like, just for us, we knew that the next logical step was to have a building base where people can come. We know we'll get more volunteers. We don't want to be storing a lot of things, but it's more the case of being set up. So if someone wants to walk in with across the road getting their groceries and bring their grandma's photos, and maybe we can digitise them while they go shopping. And that would just be brilliant.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you very much, Susie. That's just wonderful to hear about the talk, and it's exciting to hear that you've got another big step on the horizon as well. And I can see lots of positive messages in the chat too. All right, I'll pass you over to Gillian Hiscock now from Royal Historical Society.
I won't do the dreaded PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, but I'll just talk about generally, we are an existing collection, 1909 onwards. So we had a very large collection to deal with when we moved into eHive. And you can see the kind of mixture of material we have. We've just clocked over about 38,000 records in the system. And every day it pumps up because we've got a mass of volunteers at the moment that we're recataloguing a lot of things as well as adding new material. So when you said we're active, we really are active in using the system. So as I move through the slides, what I've actually concentrated on this, and I think this balances in a way really nicely with the presentation we've just had, because what I'm going to be talking about is how it's changed our processes, because we were working with old DB TextWorks databases. And so we were moving from a purely library system to a museum system, which was a change for us, but it certainly gave us more scope. We've still got a lot of image records, artwork, map, and postcard records that sit in standalone DB TextWorks databases. And that's what we're concentrating on at the moment. And we're doing it manually. So we did our first migration through a mass bulk migration via a CSV file, but we're now concentrating on recataloguing the material as we move it into the system. Because we're also doing images and artwork and maps, we're also heavily using the attached images to the records, which is very, very important. We get harvested. I thought it was Trove nightly, but it doesn't matter. It just gets harvested up into Trove, which has brought us some really big benefits in exposing our collection to a broader base of users. That's been really practical. And Susie, that we can throw into our grant applications as well when we talk about it. What I've got here is I've just thrown in one of the Lightbox views of the collection, because for me a vast improvement in the way we operate is having historically had separate databases for each material format. To find anything or get a view of what we had in the collection was just impossible. With combining all the records into one database gives us an immediate and vast business improvement. But also there's the wow factor of being able to bring up the Lightbox view for things where we do have attachments to show people. And it really does display itself with our maps and images. We can now send a link to our eHive first page and give people a URL of this existing search, which they will throw in or do a search for themselves, and they'll get the search results and the view to look at. And it's been really impressive. People love a picture, people love a map, and it's much sexier than the flat list of objects, which are often just library books with a standard record. Nothing sexy about that at all. So we do have, and Susie, this is taking on board the comment about how many people you have using. I have a lot of volunteers here, and they've been used to cataloguing in our system for a long time. So I worked through how we catalogue things, and I actually identified which tabs within a record we would use, and I wrote up check sheets for this. So I have a long view that if the next person who comes after me, if it ever happens that we have to shift to a new system or a new version, that I want my data as clean as possible. So I want people to, our volunteers, just to use the fields that I nominate and not other fields. So that's working in the main, and it just means because I'm cleaning up 80 years of bad cataloguing in the existing system, it means that if we have to move, God forbid, then the data is going to be as clean as possible. But it also means that our searches make more sense. So the tabs I've indicated are used in descending order, but we do tend to use them all over time. So I'll just talk about the improvements to our processes that have gone before. So I've already talked about having a union catalogue instead of single databases with slightly different cataloguing in all of them. We've been really pleased to be able to use the adding multiple fields for creators and subjects, etc. It's meant that we are able to do better and more effective cataloguing. Our creator list of, sort of skills of everything from lithographer to compiler to author to editor. That's been a big improvement for us. And it's kind of, you don't think about what you don't have until you get it. And then you think, oh, I can actually change my business practices. And the next one is a perfect record of that. So historically, the donor information was not put into our old system, and it is now. So we heavily use the donor and acquisitions notes. We're going through our old accessions registers to try and match things and put the notes in the records as we go. Sometimes it's just a name and a date, but sometimes it's actually giving us what you would call provenance information, which is really, really handy. And it's giving, it's meaning people who use, internal people who use the catalogue record, because that's only available in the signed in view. So the staff here can pick up reference inquiries more easily. They've got more information in the record to kind of take the leap from. We're using the related record, and that is if we have a photograph where we have an original print, a copy print, a glass slide, a negative. The photograph of our Parliament House is the catalogue record, but will note what the related records are. Now, that's probably bending the museum rules a little bit, but that means for me, and a little bit like you, Susie, I'm not creating lots of records for each object. I'm creating a catalogue record which tells us what formats we've got in it and where they're kept. So the related record notes might indicate the box that it's in or whatever else. So you've got a full list in one record of where it is. That's been really useful. Conservation notes. This has been one we've started to utilise very heavily. And again, Susie, this will allow us to be able to pull up lists of deteriorating material that we can identify when we look to going out and getting grants for certain things. So I can immediately pull up a quick list of the material we want to target to either get grants to get large pieces of conservation work done, or to be able to indicate, say, for we're just about to look at a request for new shelving in our images room. Part of that request will include commentary about the amount of material we hold, which is in a deteriorating situation. That's been really good. And that's in part what I've thought about in the way I've utilised a number of the fields. Love the refine results option you guys rolled out about 2 years ago. Made a huge difference, but also to sell the product to other people, it made a huge difference. So I talked to smaller historical societies about systems they can use, and while I'm not allowed to recommend specifically, but I do talk about the options you can get if you move to certain types of products, and this is what we do in our system. We've also added in valuation data. So we have in the cupboard behind me, we've got a lot of rare books. We've got a volunteer who was an antiquarian bookseller. I got him to go through our antiquarian books, rare books, and just pop in what really is insurance estimates for us, because occasionally we get asked to for insurance purposes and maybe assets insurance and things like that, to identify kind of what we estimate our collection is worth. And so it's good to have that information in the records. I've already talked about the light box showing if I have reference inquiries, often I just sit people down in front of the light box and they pop, you know, they plough their way through it. The other thing is I was talking to you, Dave, and you, Paul, about the Aboriginal material we have. We're actually at this point deciding that we'll catalogue the images we have, but we'll probably attach an image but leave it in the private view so we can see it when we log in our daily use, but it's not going to be a publicly available item. We've also found a few other ways of kind of flagging Aboriginal material, so we've sort of made the most of that. But we probably will use that option further down the track. We are running with a small team, so you know, you do what you can do in fits and starts. And finally, we hadn't really explored attaching PDFs to records, but because we've got some archive manuscript sets are humongous and have used every character in the public description field to the point of being unusable, I'm actually moving to creating finding guides for those things and attaching them to the record so that we can balance how much information is in a catalogue record and how much is not. A couple of the other things I've done is in the period field, I've built a pick list of decade by decade, which allows me to answer reference inquiries, say, I don't know, Melbourne in the 1880s. That gives me a little bit more flexibility in being able to search. And so I suppose I've identified a number of things there that have actually improved the way we can do our business, for want of a better name. It's the under the hood stuff, but it gives me a number of outcomes that are quite useful for us. So that's me, and that's me, and that's my email if anybody's interested. Very happy to talk to people about what we've done. It feels like Susie, we've got lots of stories and lots of really good outcomes. And so it's a pleasure to use the system in many ways. So
I guess you are now one of the eHive super users, if you want to call you that.
Do I get a T-shirt? No.
We'll send you an extra Christmas card. Has super user on the top. But as one of the super users, if you could look back at when you very first started using eHive, knowing what you know now, like what advice would you give yourself when you were starting out?
I suppose it's advice because I've used a lot of databases over my time, I always should know, but it was probably because I was starting in the job and everything was swirling around. But every database is different. There's no database that's perfect. Using a new database, it's often about not holding on to the old, but realising what you can do with the new. And so, you know, I think I nagged you to death about, you know, sort of being able to print out a library list in alphabetical order with a call number or something, because that's what I was used to. I was used to using library systems. and while I'd still love that on one level, it's balanced in the end with the other functions that we've been able to utilise. And in some of them, we haven't got to a critical mass yet with records where we'll get the best of them, and that will be done by a lot of the recataloguing we're doing. But I think as it's a good, robust little system, and well, even a big system as we're using. It meets our needs as a small historical organisation. It's easy for me to teach users to use it, but even more so since I've created the checklists, which I've got, you know, little snips. I love the snip tool, you know, and just describing what I want done and examples in the field. So it's moved that forward a bit, and I'm quite pleased about that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
That's all right.
Do you have like a secret guilty pleasure? Is there like a secret part of, because you've worked on lots of different things, it's like if you could start a little pet project of your own tomorrow, like what would you go and focus your time on if it was yours to choose?
In our cataloguing, our collection, do you mean? Or
yeah.
Oh, look, we often open up cupboards here and find material that's not catalogued. And so one of the things that I found wrapped in a very dirty piece of plastic turned out at the bottom of a compactus shelf was a 1719 atlas. And I think for me, I know. I think for me, I'd just like to shut the door for a month and just have just indulge myself in the cataloguing of those, because treating them as a museum object, as we do, not just as a publication, you get to start to chase up the narratives around the material, the stories, the background, some of the history of the creator, because they were done by a Belgian Dutch but based in London map maker. The story over the years, the copy was owned by an Irish reverend who gave it to a Welsh reverend. So we have, so for me, and that just means I can put all of that information into eHive. I can put notes in the research and provenance for us to use internally. I can do a really good public description, that it contains provenance and people and dates and places. So that's what I really like. And I've been a reference librarian all my working life, so I've tended to be bound by UDC and MARC records, which are as boring as all get out. So I think that would be me. But I can, the eHive system allows me to encapsulate all of that in a record, which is lovely. So I'd do more of that.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I know. I dined out on it for about 2 weeks.
You need longer, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much, Gillian, for that. We are incredibly grateful to both you and Susie for your talks. Thank you so much for your time. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Paul and everyone else involved here. We are going to be putting you into a bit of a question and answer mode before too long. So get your thinking caps ready. And Paul, over to you for the future of eHive.
Thank you, Dave. Now, from those talks, there are a few different resources which I thought are probably worth pointing out to you. So firstly, both of those wonderful collecting organisations are, of course, publicly accessible on eHive. So you can get to the Central and Western Murihiku Southland Archive and see some of those wonderful records online. So view some of the local churches, for instance, with the photography that they've scanned for those. And then we can also access the Royal Historical Society of Victoria's records, where they're using many of the different catalogue types that eHive provides. If you're wanting to talk about how eHive's used at your organisation and share with people how eHive works, we've created just an overview of the system. So that's available on YouTube. You can just do a search in YouTube for eHive product overview, and you'll find a little half-an-hour overview of all the key features. One of the themes of both of the talks was the idea of kind of standardizing how you're cataloging to make things consistent for when you're wanting to access it later. So we do provide some documentation around that concept. So providing you different references to help you standardize the way that you're doing your cataloging. So within the main eHive help website, there's a category called cataloging, and that has links to a few different resources. So firstly, we've created our own cataloging standards guide that's specific to eHive. And that's something we did with Project ARC, which was a group of museums in Southland, New Zealand. And out of that came a detailed PDF document that goes step by step through the whole system and recommends how you make use of different fields. We do support you creating your own cataloging standard, which would often be something simplified and often would be in the form starting with things like a cheat sheet, but the cataloging standards guide goes into a lot of detail and could be used as a reference as you build up your own smaller internal guide. So that goes step by step through those different catalog types that we have, and it goes right down to field level. So if I went down to a particular field, it'll give, even for text fields, style guidelines to help you be consistent as you're cataloging your collection and to get the best out of those records in the future. So I'll switch at this point and just briefly talk about some of the plans that we already have. And then, as Dave mentioned, we'll be splitting into breakout rooms where we can come up with further ideas. So the first thing that we're working on is revamping the cataloging screen itself. So as far as the product goes, that's the piece that's written in the oldest piece of technology. So it's largely based on the technology we used when we first launched eHive, but that's now getting out of date. And to some extent, that's actually constraining what we can do in adding new features to the cataloging part of the system. So this is just a screenshot of the in-progress cataloging screen that we're building. So two of the most notable changes are that it properly fits in with the styling of the rest of the website, so it just feels a bit more consistent with the rest of the product. And secondly, it's what we call a responsive design, which means that it fits the layout of the screen you're on. At the moment in the existing cataloging screen, if you tried to view it on a smaller screen size, part of it will just run off the page. So we're revamping that cataloging screen so you could actually use it on any size of screen, including tablet devices and mobile phones. So if you were in a physical storage area for the collection, you could potentially log into eHive on your phone to update a few fields of information while you're in that storage area. And then, as I said, that's an upgrade of the technology itself. So that will enable us to then start doing some of the other enhancements we've been wanting to make to that cataloging screen. The next thing we're working on is the ability to manage lists of records. So to manually pick a set of collection items and then save them as a named group for whatever purpose. Now that's a function that we already have working in another one of our web products. We've got another product called Vernon CMS, and the online module of that has the ability to make lists. And I'll just quickly show you how that works to demonstrate what we're planning for eHive. So here I'm logged into the admin section of Vernon Browser. I've got a set of search results. And then on that search results, we can see on the left, we've got the ability to add those into a list. So at any point, you're working on one particular named list, and you can create new lists at any point, bring up an old list to maintain it further. And then whenever you're searching in the system, you've just got options to add and remove records to a list you're working on. One of the important things about creating lists is that's going to be the foundation for us to do bulk updates to records. So if you want to bulk flag a group of 100 records as now being publicly accessible, at the moment you do that record by record, but by us creating an option for you to make lists of records, that will be the foundation for us then to allow you to bulk change those set of records in some way, like publishing them all or changing the rights type of all of them. The last thing that I wanted to note is in terms of upcoming changes, there is a public set of pages for documenting both our future roadmap and recent releases we've made. So just in case you're not aware of those are available just on the main information site for eHive. So there's info.ehive.com. And under that, on the About page, there's a roadmap. And that describes the features we're currently working on. So we've talked about the changes to the create or edit screen and save lists, but there's other things that we've already got documented on that roadmap. And then it also has the release history. So that just documents every time we add a new feature to eHive, when we made that publicly available, and a brief summary of what that feature does. And you'll be able to see that pretty much every couple of months we're adding another feature to the system. So that's a quick overview of some of the things we've already got in mind. I'll be getting Penny now to split us into two broad groups, and then we can see whether there's any particular suggestions or questions you've got for us. All right, thanks everybody. What I'll do is I'll just briefly list some of the ideas that came out of our working group. And then Dave, you've probably got some notes from your one. So from our group, some of the things that came through were the options for streamlining the review of records. So when you've got lots of volunteers trying to make sure that their data is consistent. So things like perhaps setting mandatory fields on certain types of records, and to more strictly enforce what type of information has been entered into certain fields. So particularly the number and date fields, tightening up what information is going into there. Secondly, we had the ability to automatically log who worked on each record. So we now in eHive have the option of different people having their own logins. So extending that further so that whenever somebody saves a record, they would be part of a permanent little history on that record to say this person changed this record on this date. Next, we had ideas around organisations when they're first getting started. So providing things like maybe basic introduction videos on core features in the system, and maybe a getting started guide to say, well, as an organisation, these are things you should really think about when you're digitising your collection for the first time. So a kind of cut down version of our cataloguing standards guide to say, these are the things you really should have in place before you get started. So those were the key areas that we had. I'll pass you over to Dave then for his notes.
Yeah, we had all about being able to create reports in a much more simple way so that we could actually select which fields and include an image. So we talked a little bit about the more complicated way of doing sort of sending it out of word merge and that kind of stuff, but a much more simplified way of kind of going, I'd like a report with these three fields, thanks, and the picture. So yeah, an alternative reporting format there. We talked about flexibility for an input screen, so that as people are inputting data, volunteers being able to input data, that we would look at having a sort of refined and also, I guess, almost like simple instructions, so that people inputting aren't having to have access to that entire range of options that are there. And we got slightly there a little bit onto how that might impact the import spreadsheet that we currently manually import for clients as well. And also uploading paperwork and documentation to do with inheritances. Sorry, Naomi, I didn't get that word out properly at all then, did I? But just being able to make that simple, simplify that process to avoid having to work across two systems in this instance. And I know for a couple of our guests in our room, Sandy and Julianne, we didn't get a chance to kind of hear your comments. So feel free, and anybody actually, any other suggestions, just feel free to be able to email those through to us, and we'll pick those up after we've kind of done the meeting. We're very, very keen to hear everybody's thoughts, even if we didn't get through them all in this little section.
Just quickly, Dave, I saw there were a couple more suggestions that came in through the chat. So Gillian was saying it would be useful to lock down who can create terms in some specific term lists, so that you can have a bit more control over things like the subject categories, and say, well, maybe there's only certain groups within the organisation that are allowed to maintain those lists. And then there was the suggestion from Susie to have an area of the system where you could create records about both people and places to then connect to the collection. So you could group them together with maybe a particular subject person might have a record and links to many different collection items.
Yeah, And again, another good suggestion there, perhaps the opening screen with the section collapsed by default so there's less scrolling. That I don't know off the top of my head, but that may be something that would be much more possible to do with our new cataloging screen as that's coming. So work is underway on that as we speak. So yeah, for those of you who didn't manage to kind of get all of your ideas forward, feel free to send them through to us. We will pick them up and follow them up for you. I think that about wraps us up for this meeting. What I found really comforting over the past couple of weeks as we've had all the registrations coming in is to see really quite a nice cross-section of the type of users that the eHive community is, and here on the call as well. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who's joined us here today. For anybody who'll be watching later on a video, to you as well, because without you and without our users, the community isn't what it is. And so we say a very big thank you to all of you. And a huge thank you to Susie and Gillian for your time and your talks today. And thank you everyone for joining us at the first ever meeting. And there will be more. So we'll see you again soon at another date, and we'll catch you soon.